Hello, people. Let's kick this channel off with some unexplainable events. This channel will cover a variety of topics told in the first-person point of view. It can range from stalking to unexplainable phenomena to home invasions and so much more. This world is full of stories. So, today, let's listen to some stories that just don't seem to have a conclusion. Grab a glass of wine or water or whatever you need, and let's get started. I was on an assignment for the Army, making my way up from San Antonio, Texas to Tacoma, Washington. It was a long drive, and they gave me 6 days to report to my new unit, but I didn't mind. I love road trips. There's nothing like the freedom of exploring the world by yourself. The first day of my journey, I planned to get as much driving in as possible so I could spend a few days in Utah, a sort of mini vacation, you could say. This was January, and the days were short, so maximizing the amount of daylight I had was crucial. I got up extra early that morning, carried the last of my bags out to my Corolla, signed out of my old unit, and hit the road at roughly 5 a.m. It was an amazing day. I saw the landscape transform around me as I headed farther west than I had ever been in my life. From the San Antonio metropolitan area, to the savannas of the Edwards Plateau, to the pancake flat farmland of the Great Plains region, America's breadbasket. Finally, the farms opened up into prairie, and I saw the "Welcome to New Mexico, the Land of Enchantment" sign. Now I was really in the middle of nowhere. Continuing on US Route 380, I finally found myself in Roswell. I could have gotten a few more hours of driving in and made it to Albuquerque, but I figured since I was in no rush, I might as well see what Roswell had to offer. Who knows if I could get a chance to visit again. As a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious, as Mr. Bolland would say, I took a self-guided tour of the shops and attractions. The next day, I continued to Albuquerque, then westward on Interstate 40. By the time I reached Gallup and started northbound on US Route 491, I still had 2 hours of driving left before crossing the border into Colorado, and another 45 minutes before I would get to Cortez, my planned stop for the night. However, my daylight was already running out, as sunset was at 6 p.m. I got Starbucks and refreshed myself for the final stretch. It was supposed to be easy, just a straight shot, but looking back on it now, I figured that had I decided to stop in Albuquerque instead of Roswell the night previous, I would have already been in Colorado by now, and possibly be making my way into Utah. I would have saved myself from what was waiting for me on that desolate highway. Route 491 stretched far into the Navajo Nation. On either side of me were endless expansions of prairie, bookended by dark indigo mountains on the horizon. To my left, the sky glowed a faint orange-purple, the light slowly dying down like smoldering embers in a fire, until finally plunging the land into darkness. Every now and then, I would see the forlorn headlights of another car passing by, which gave me a bit of relief that I wasn't alone. I also had my road trip playlist on to keep me company, and call me ironic, but Hotel California was playing. After passing the small, lonely town of Newcomb, the next piece of civilization would be Shiprock. However, between the two was a 36-mile stretch of absolute nothingness, an abyss I had to cross. I was not ready for what I was about to witness. After several miles, and having not seen another car on the road, I saw something strange emerge from the horizon. Barely lit by the moonlight, I thought it was a road sign at first. Then, as I came closer, I realized it was a person, walking on the shoulder of the road, heading in my direction. I squinted, trying my hardest to focus on the figure. In the darkness, I could tell they were wearing a poncho of some sort, with long, black hair flowing down past their chest. Who could be walking out here all alone at night, I thought. Whoever it was, they had no lights, no reflectors, no strobes of any kind to signal to passing cars that they were there. And they walked on the pavement, dangerously close to oncoming traffic. I pulled to the left a bit, giving them a wide berth. Suddenly, my stereo cut out, as if I had turned it off. The screen went completely dark, and my phone disconnected from Bluetooth. While this was unusual, it certainly did happen from time to time, so I thought nothing of it. As I approached, I saw the person raise their right arm as if to flag me down and hitch a ride. Oh, no, I thought. There is no way that's happening, buddy. As my headlights swept by, I realized it was a man dressed in a button-up shirt, a wool poncho, jeans, and cowboy boots. His large belt buckle glinted as the light passed him. But in that split second, I realized with abject shock that not only were his eyes painfully wide open, but they seemed to be tracking me. Somehow, he was able to see me through the glare of my headlights and look me dead in the eyes, not breaking contact until I passed. I was shaken for a bit, but my nerves gradually subsided. My stereo abruptly turned back on and my music continued playing. I brushed everything off as simply my imagination, The darkness and the shadows playing tricks on my mind. Besides, the man was behind me. I figured he must have been drunk. Indian reservations sadly had high rates of alcoholism. I looked in my rearview mirror. He was gone. I couldn't see him. Maybe he's too far behind me. No, that couldn't be. It must be too dark. Maybe. I drove on, trying to figure out what had just happened, but at the same time forcing myself not to think about it. Just when I thought I had moved on, I saw another shape in the distance. Getting closer, I realized it was another figure. Another person walking alone at night? There's no way. They walked along the shoulder of the road, swaying back and forth. Slowly, I could make out that this person was also wearing a poncho. Then I saw what looked like long black hair reaching down past the chest. No. There's no way. It was the man. The same man. But how? The man raised his arm again, trying to flag me down. What did this guy want? I kept up my pace with no intention of stopping for any reason. Just like last time, my stereo turned off again. Suddenly, the man leapt out onto the road, arms waving frantically. I swerved into the left lane, narrowly avoiding him. In my headlights, I noticed he had the same wide-eyed look, his gaze locked onto mine. I also saw that his clothes did not look as they did the first encounter. Once they were clean, if not well worn, but now they were soiled and tattered, rags barely hanging onto his withered frame. His hair was wild and unkempt, with clods of dried dirt stuck in the locks, but his eyes remained the same. My heart nearly burst through my chest at the sudden shock. Hyperventilating, I slowed down and glanced into the rearview mirror to make sure he was all right. Nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to see. The man was running. He was sprinting towards me. I centered the wheel and accelerated, hoping to get as much distance from him as possible, but as I continued to speed up, so did he. Faster and faster I drove, but every time I looked in the mirror, I would still see him right behind me, perfectly keeping pace, his body tinted red by the taillights. I could feel my temples throbbing and my hands getting slick with sweat on the steering wheel. I was sick to my stomach. There's no way. I looked forward, hoping to see a faint glimmer of light from the town ahead, but I was still too far away. I looked back at the rearview mirror. The man was gone. I should have been relieved, but I knew better. Where did he go? I looked around, hoping to regain a visual on him. I couldn't see anything. Taking a deep breath, I refocused on the road, but kept my guard up. Just keep driving, I told myself. Only a few more miles to go. Out of the corner of my right eye, I saw something. Another shape. It wasn't the man. At least I didn't think so. I glanced over, bracing myself for whatever was going to meet my sight. It looked like an animal. Some kind of animal, though I couldn't make out exactly what it was. Under the moonlight, I could see it running alongside my car, its forelimbs reaching out in long strides, its back undulating like a dog. Closer and closer it came. The closer it was, the more of it I could see, little by little. Then I noticed its limbs were far too long for its body. Its body was too short. It had no tail. The head was oddly round. And from it came a trail of long black hair. I slammed my foot on the gas, pushing my car's engine harder than it had ever been pushed before. By now, I was clocking well over 110 miles per hour. But this creature, it kept up. It wasn't phased. It simply ran faster and faster to match my speed. Just what was this thing? How could anyone or anything run this fast? The entity seemed to have endless stamina. Just how long could it keep this up? Just how much faster could it go? Soon my car would hit its top speed, and then what? How long could it maintain that before breaking down? It wouldn't be long until my engine overheats. But regardless, I would eventually run out of gas. And when I do, what would happen if that thing got me? At 120 miles per hour, my car had reached its limit. This was the fastest I could go, but the creature continued its pursuit. My temperature gauge was approaching the red, and so was my tachometer. I couldn't keep this up any longer. Suddenly, like the beacon of a lighthouse on a tumultuous sea, the first light of shiprock came into view. It was close. So close, if I could just go a little longer, I could make it into town, to safety. I pressed on. I fixed my eyes on the lights, growing brighter on the horizon. They bloomed outwards, glimmering in the night air. Though it was a small town, it was a sight for sore eyes in my situation. Looking in my periphery, I saw the undulation of the creature's spine as it kept pace with my car. But now it was slipping away, steering further and further from the road. It suddenly hit me just how hard my heart was beating. Beads of sweat dripped down my face. I looked over. The creature was gone. But this time, the feeling of dread had also gone with it. My stereo once again turned back on, and as my music resumed, I breathed a deep sigh of relief. I let off the accelerator. The man, the creature, whatever it was finally gone for good. Having white-knuckled the steering wheel the whole time without realizing it, my hands were extremely sore, but I was just glad to have made through. A week later, I told another soldier in my unit about what I had experienced. Being originally from Albuquerque, she was familiar with the Native American legends of the Southwest. The conversation steered toward a certain creature that she would not dare speak the name of. She also told me that the highway I took was well known for all sorts of paranormal phenomena. Google what Route 491 used to be called, and everything will make sense. Be careful out there. Insert transition noise here. June 1994. Appomattox, Virginia. I'm pretty sure it was a Thursday. I know school was out for the summer. I was watching I Dream of Jeannie on Nick at Night. We were poor and didn't have an air conditioner, so we kept the back door open with the screen door closed. I went to the kitchen to get a drink, and you know that feeling you get when someone is staring at you? I felt that coming from the porch. So I look over at the screen door. About 3.5 to 4 feet tall, all white with big black eyes, this thing staring at me. I freaked out and ran to tell my mom. She seemed sure that I was dreaming, but I definitely wasn't. Later that night, I had gone to bed. I don't remember why, but for some reason, I didn't have a blanket on my bed that night. So I'm laying there, facing the wall, when I feel the staring again. I roll over, and this thing is standing beside my bed. Keeping in mind that the back door was open and my mom was in her bedroom, it could have easily just walked through the house to my room. Anyway, I screamed and jumped over the end of the bed and ran to my mom. Refused to go back into my room that night. Last time I saw that particular thing. But, round 2, April 2013, Lynchburg, Virginia. I had just turned 30, and I was working 12-hour overnight shifts at a factory. I woke up on Wednesday afternoon, the first day of my work week. I went downstairs, townhouse, and started making sandwiches and gathering fruit and granola bars to take to work with me. We had a sliding glass door for a back door with giant blinds. 2 of the slats were missing. So, I felt staring. I looked toward the back door and saw this thing, about 7 feet tall, all black with pointy ears and no other discernible facial features. I blue screened for about 30 seconds. Then it shook its head and walked away. I finally ran into the living room and hid for a while. September 1993 to February 1999. Appomattox. We moved into that house in September 1993. One afternoon, about a week after we moved in, me and my brother both saw a bright red Mustang pull into the driveway, and a man in a black suit got out. We looked at each other, then the man and the car were gone. On another weekend afternoon, the 2 of us were playing around with a small tape recorder. My brother was making creepy faces and not saying anything, and I was asking him to stop. So we played the tape back. My voice sounded muffled and in the background. The main thing we heard was what sounded like an old lady laughing. My brother broke the tape recorder. A few weeks later, our older brother, 22 at the time, I was 12, and the other brother was 17, brought some beers over while Mom and Bill were out for the day. We told Shane about what had happened, and he, the eternal atheist, just laughed. Then, something grabbed his arm hard, and we saw several small bite marks, like mouse-sized, appear on his arm. Whatever it was let go, and his arm was bleeding, with the small teeth marks still there. One night during a snowstorm, the power went out. Me and my brother lived at opposite ends of the hall, with the bathroom in between us right by my room. Mom was in the living room reading by an oil lamp, and she heard the bathroom light flicking on and off. She called out that the power was out, but the flicking continued. She checked on my brother, then me, and we were both in our rooms. The flicking never stopped. She went into her room for the rest of the night. November 2000. Appomattox again. One of my friends was legit rich, and his family had roughly 200 acres of land and forest behind his house. Our drama team had just won regionals, and my friend was celebrating by having a huge campout on his property. At about 2 a.m., he asks who wants to see the witch's grave. So, a small group of us, about 4 to 5 guys and 1 girl, jumped on 4-wheelers and headed to the end of the property to see this, quote, witch's graveyard. We stopped on one end of the field and walked over to the small cemetery. Even with some of my prior experiences, I was always the skeptic, so I took the lead. My friend and his cousin started yelling for me to stop right as I was entering the cemetery. They shined a flashlight right around my neck area. There was a piece of barbed wire hanging right at neck height across the entrance, and I was about 2 inches away from it. They insisted that it hadn't been there when they were out earlier in the day. So we ducked under the barbed wire, and Dustin showed us the witch's grave, a spot between 2 trees where there was no grass. I walked over to it, stood on it, jumped up and down, and said, "Come get me!" Nothing. So we started walking back toward the four-wheelers. As we were walking across the field, a person appeared in the middle of our group, walking in the direction of the cemetery. It looked like a woman, in a black cloak. It walked up to Emily, the only girl in the group. It put its hand on her chest, and it came out her back. She screamed the most unearthly scream I had ever heard, and Dustin yelled for us to get to the dam. So we ran for the dam and stayed there for about half an hour before heading back to the campsite. I spoke to Emily about this recently, and just the thought of it scares the hell out of her, and she refuses to talk about it. Summer 1995. I wake up in the middle of the night, among the earlier experiences of my lifelong battle with insomnia. I kept hearing what sounded like someone talking in a language I didn't understand. I was too scared to get up and investigate, but eventually I jumped up and turned my light on, which gave me a minimal amount of courage. I worked up some courage and followed the sounds to my brother's room. He had his door locked, but I could hear him talking through the door. Thing is, the only languages he knows are English and marginal Spanish, and I know English, conversational Spanish, and French. He was saying something in a language that I couldn't understand, and for the life of me, it sounded like he was speaking backwards. For whatever it's worth, he is schizophrenic and has a long history of not taking his medication. July 1996. I was 13. My brother was in the hospital for an extended period of time due to a nasty battle with appendicitis, and Mom and Bill decided to leave me alone for the first time. So I was just there with my 2 cats. Yes, they were both mine. I fed both of them and cleaned their litter box myself. Being a 13-year-old metalhead struggling with insomnia, I watched a lot of MTV and HBO. I remember seeing the video for Oasis's Don't Look Back in Anger and Space Hog's Cruel to Be Kind, and I stayed up just to watch a movie called Serpent's Lair on HBO. We had a big bay window in the living room, and many times when I was up watching music videos, I would hear a series of knocks on the front window. 3 knocks, then about 30 seconds of silence, then 3 more knocks. If I went to look out the window, the knocks would come from the front door. Whenever I went to bed around 5 to 6 a.m., I would sometimes hear the knocking from my bedroom window. June 1997. I was home with my brother. I was 14 and he had just turned 20. He had been out drinking with some friends and was concerned because he said that he had drank more alcohol that night than he ever had before. At midnight, he walked into the living room and asked me about hangovers, wondering if they started, quote, the next day. I said yes, but not at midnight, but when you wake up. He was mesmerized by the animation of the rain on the TV, and I was just like, oy vey. I was sitting in a chair in the living room. There was a table beside me with my and my mom's books on it, then the sofa beside that. As I was explaining hangovers to my brother, my mom's oil lamp flipped over onto the lower half of the table and broke, spilling oil everywhere. Brother's eyes got really wide, and he retreated to his room. December 2011, Lynchburg, Virginia. The back window of my SUV had been broken out by an idiot driving an 18-wheeler, so I had fixed my back window with duct tape and clear plastic. I worked third shift at a soap factory at the time. I was driving to work one night at about 10:15 when I heard a weird sound from my back seat. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw red reflective eyes. I swerved and slammed on the brakes, stopping at an odd angle to the road. I jumped out of the truck and looked in the back seat, and raccoon. I opened the door and waited for it to run away. March 2012, same soap factory. I worked QA on third shift, and I was the only QA on third. I often heard voices and saw things moving out of the corner of my eye, but attributed it to being alone in a huge office with multiple empty rooms, alone from 11 until 6:30 when first shift comes in. One night, I kept hearing what sounded like mumbling coming from one of the empty rooms whenever I walked by. Once again, alone, late at night, so I didn't really think anything of it, but at about 3 a.m., I heard a distinct but nonsensical exclamation as I walked by that office. I looked in the window on the door and saw a tall, thin, scruffy guy running toward the door. I ran into the main part of the warehouse and grabbed the warehouse lead. We went back into my area and we found the scruffy guy sleeping on the floor. Called the police. He was a homeless guy that had snuck into the warehouse and fallen asleep in one of the empty rooms in my office. March 2022. Yeah, this year. I love horror. Around this time, I had become obsessed with skinwalkers. even to the point where, big mistake, I discovered the actual Native American word for them, and read multiple stories about them, including several that used that word. Now, coyotes aren't super prevalent here in Lynchburg, but they do come around. I started hearing a high-pitched barking around the side and back of my house around this time. One night, I heard something slapping against my window. This window is about 8 feet off the ground, so I opened the blinds around 2 a.m., and there's a coyote. Front paws against my window, just staring. I don't know what coyote eyes are supposed to be like, but this thing's eyes looked human. I'm not religious, but I said a prayer and put an old Bible up against the window. I legit looked up a shaman online and had him come out and bless my house. I also looked up a Catholic priest and had him come and bless the house. My logical brain says it was just a coyote, but it hasn't been back since then. Transition noise here. It is Friday morning and I'm sitting here waiting for my truck to be loaded for work. It got me thinking about my other job and the strange things that I had been witness to while working it. I have shared a few of the bigger encounters already, but I will share a few more of the not big but still frightening things I have witnessed. To start, I am a 43-year-old female who now drives trucks for a living, but back in the day when I was pretty and young, I decided to work as an exotic dancer. The job paid well, and in Western Canada, where I am from, it meant I got to travel from club to club every week and meet lots of new and interesting people. It also meant I spent a lot of time in different hotels. Most strip clubs in Western Canada are in a bar attached to a hotel. Most of these hotels are older, and as you can imagine, there are restless spirits in many. This first story happened in Fort St. John. I was still a rookie dancer, and it was my first time there. I didn't own a car yet, so a new friend I had made in my last job offered to give me a ride there. Once we arrived and I was lugging my 2 heavy suitcases up the stairs with his help, we both noticed and remarked on a subtle but tangible feeling of darkness and oppression in the hall. My new friend Scott and I were both sensitive to spirits, and we could feel that this place had them in abundance. He helped me to my room and bid me goodbye. As I normally did every week, I began to unpack, putting my clothes in the dresser, my costumes hung in the closet, and finally my makeup and body care bottles on the dresser before turning on the TV and sitting back on the bed. That is when it happened. I heard a loud thud, and all of a sudden it was as if a giant hand swept across the entire dresser, flinging everything on it across the room violently. I won't lie, I had my 2 suitcases open and was repacking everything within minutes. There was no way I was staying there alone. Then, all of a sudden, the door to the room opened, and in walked another girl with a suitcase. I had noticed the other bed, but had not thought that it could possibly mean I was going to have a roomie. We stared at each other for a second, me in the middle of packing and her in the doorway. "What are you doing?" she asked me. "I am getting the heck out of here," I replied. I gave her a quick rundown of what happened, all the while continuing to pack. Her face grew concerned. When she saw I meant to leave. "You'll get in trouble," she said. "Ask me if I care," I answered back. "What about me? I don't want to stay here alone." Finally, I paused. I didn't know this girl, but I hesitated to leave her here alone. What she had said was also true. Blowing off a booking would get me in trouble with the agency. "All right, I will stay if you promise to spend nights here with me and not take off." She gave her word, which of course by Wednesday she had broke, and I found myself alone in that hotel on more than one night. Every time I would leave the room, the lights in the long hallway, which were always on, would go off just behind me. There were knocks and strange sounds of whispers, but luckily I didn't see any specters. That happened at this next hotel. A few years into my dancing career, and I was working in the town of Rocky Mountain House. I had been to this club and hotel a few times before, but because my dad lived about an hour's drive, I had never stayed at the hotel. This was another one of those situations where 2 girls would share an accommodation. In this case, a partial suite. It was the first show of the week. I was upstairs in the room and sitting on the floor with a large mirror propped up in front of me. The other girl was on first, and as I was getting ready in front of the mirror, I thought to myself, where is she? She's going to be late. No sooner did I have that thought when I saw her walk behind and past me into her bedroom. She didn't acknowledge me or turn the light on and just disappeared into the dark room. I didn't think too much about it though, just continued to get ready. But her show was in 5 minutes. Maybe she forgot? Had she laid down for a second only to fall asleep? I decided to go and wake her. I went to the door and peered in, only the room was empty. She wasn't there. But I had seen her, or at least what I thought was her, the solid shape of a girl with long dark hair going into the room. Now in truth, This hotel always gave me the heebie-jeebies, but now I was seeing ghosts in there. It explains a lot, actually. Why I was always cold when I was in that room, no matter how many blankets or layers I had on. When the other dancer walked through the door, I was pretty shaken and ashen-faced. I told her what had happened, about seeing a spirit I thought was her. She pretty much just brushed it off, and we finished the night's shows. This week, for some reason, I can't remember, I was not able to stay at my dad's. I asked the other girl if she was planning to stay at the hotel as well, and she said she had a friend who lived in town that she would be staying with. That was a hellish week. Whatever lived there would not leave me alone, pulling my hair, creating cold spaces right in front of me, and whispering my name and other things beside me. I have tried very hard my whole life not to hear or interact with spirits. That is, of course, until this next story that I will save till another post because this one is getting long. All I can say is old hotels and bars often equal restless spirits. Transition noise. Last night, something weird happened. To start, I recently moved to Georgia for my husband's job. Behind our house there's a little wooded area and a small pond, per our landlord. The way to get back there is through the back door, which is basically a glass panel door that allows you to see outside. Prior to last night, my son has also had a weird experience with the back door in question. Anyway, my son is only a year old, so he can't tell me what he saw, but from my husband and my point of view, he was staring outside and crying. He couldn't move, he could just stare and cry. What made it weird was that he was fine a couple minutes before he even looked outside. I picked my son up in front of the door and he continued to look outside and cry. I turned my attention toward the door and saw nothing outside other than the trees in our neighbor's backyard, but I felt something was off. We walked away and he was back to his normal self. I ignored it after that and just made sure to keep an eye out for anything. Fast forward to last night. I was sitting on the couch rewatching Bridgerton. My husband had been asleep for a while now, and the baby was well asleep in his bed on the other side of the house. So I'm sitting on the couch when suddenly I heard 3 knocks on the back door behind me. Instantly I felt chills down my spine, and I stayed as still as possible. I could feel something behind me, just watching me. I physically couldn't bring myself to get my husband in our room in front of me or look back. I checked my phone to see what time it was as I texted my best friend, and the clock read 2 a.m. on the dot. After a while, the feeling went away and I finished the show, then went to bed. This morning I woke up and tried Googling what it could have possibly have been, and couldn't find anything. So I ask you, who or what do you think was knocking on my door?